and welcome to the Bossed Up Podcast, episode 547. I'm your host, Emily Aries, the founder and CEO of Bossed Up. And today I am excited to dig into the concept of executive presence. What the heck is it? How do you develop it? And why is it so important to so many people, especially women listening, who have been told a time or two that they need to work on their executive presence? If that sounds like you are in for a treat. Helping me to break all of this down is Dr. Alexa Chilcutt, co-lead for the Academy for Women in Leadership and a Johns Hopkins University executive communication expert. She designs transformational learning experiences for professional women worldwide, helping them break through gender barriers and lead with confidence. She's also the co-author of the new book, The Presence Principle, Embodying Executive Presence to Lead with Impact. It shares tools needed to lead with confidence and grace, and she and I get into what that looks like in today's conversation. So Dr. Alexa Chilcutt, welcome to the Bossed Up Podcast.
I'm excited to be here and to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to dig into this concept of executive presence with a scholar behind the term, right? Because it's so often discussed, but so rarely understood. And so I'm really excited to dig into this in a practical, tactical way. But first, tell my listeners sort of your background, how you got to this work and how you approach it.
Okay, well, my first basically job, right, which was not in academia at all, I was in advertising and public relations. So I was a development director for a nonprofit, and I loved that work. But really, when you think about it, that's kind of what we're talking about is impression management, communication, and how you think about the most desired impressions that you want, whether it's individually or for a company. And then how do you kind of align your strengths and what you're really about to creating those impressions. So that's really at the heart of everything that I do. Like I loved that world, and I think it just makes sense.
I love it. So let's dig into what this term is really all about. Because people talk about executive presence a lot, especially in the context of someone not having it. Right? Like that person needs more executive presence, or women listening to this podcast have probably gotten that feedback from their leaders in the past. Like, I need you to work on your executive presence. And that can feel very confusing because the definition feels very subjective and subject to interpretation. So when you think about executive presence, like what is it and what is it not?
Mm, mhm. Well, first of all, you are 100% correct. It is confusing. And in fact, the research shows, so I'll just throw out some stats first to just kind of create a level set, right? Like, why is it important? There was a survey of 400 CEOs, corporate communication executives, and professional development managers. Out of those 400, 89% said that executive presence directly contributes to career advancement. And 79% of them said if there's a perceived lack of executive presence, it holds people back. But then the Center for Talent Innovation found that 81%, like you said, of people who receive feedback about you need to improve that, you're not quite there. The feedback is contradictory a lot of times and confusing, and that those people have no idea what to work on. So it's left us in this really kind of ambiguous space, right? So, what is executive presence? We can go into lots of different characteristics later on, but at the heart of it, it is someone's ability as a leader, right? Because think executive, you are getting things done through other people. And that's when that presence matters, is when people are looking at you for leadership positions. And it's your ability to align, engage, influence, motivate, right? People to action. And so, what are those things that you can kind of accomplish that aligning, engaging? It takes trust, it takes confidence, right, in who you are, your abilities. And so, there are lots of different characteristics of executive presence. But at the end of the day, it's, are you a leader people can trust, that motivates them, that encourages and engages them, and that they want to follow?
Yeah, I love that. I always think of executive presence like meta perception, right? It's someone else's perception of you. and your ability to step up, to lead, to engage, to whatever, to take something else on. And so it's not just your perception of yourself that you're managing, you're really managing other people's perceptions of you, which is kind of an advertising job, to go back to where you started your career, right? It's marketing yourself. And that can just feel really tricky when you don't know what's going to do it for the other people. You don't know what matters to them. And so there's just so much ambiguity, right? Like you're saying there, that can leave people who get that feedback feeling really like they're spinning their wheels.
So that is the place you said it's tricky. That is the place that people really get bogged down a little bit because I think the old idea of executive presence is that we need to put on presence and that it looks a certain way. But the way that my colleague Carl DuPont and I have began to teach this, because we began working with a Fortune 200 company, training their mid-level, and it was really a program for mid-level leaders that they were trying to equip to become higher level leaders, but it was a minority employees within this Fortune 200 company, right? And so we were really having to dig into how do you do this authentically in a strengths based way that your executive presence doesn't have to look like somebody else's executive presence. And so taking stock of your strengths, your values, what are you as a leader when you're at your best? Okay, then taking stock of that, and then how do we then really communicate that out so that people see that in us?
Totally. And I like that you mentioned identity here because your book really is the first guide for what you call the presence principle, which is the title of the book, specifically designed for diverse and underrepresented professionals. So, what do you feel like was missing from the traditional conversation about executive presence that made this a necessary conversation to have?
Yeah, I think Carl and I are also a great team to do this. I'm a woman. I work with a lot of women. I coach women. I'm the co-lead for the Academy for Women in Leadership at Johns Hopkins in executive education. And so I see it so much from women's perspective and all of the different aspects, right? Culturally diverse, where we come from, all of that. And then Carl, right, is a man, but he is a kind of an underrepresented man, right? He's fabulous because he's a international opera singer, but
Oh,
he's a black man who is also kind of from the South, as I am. And so we're constantly negotiating those identities. And so when we began to teach it, I think it was combating the idea of putting on that executive presence, you know, getting away from the Mad Men. Remember that series?
yeah. Well, I immediately evoke a white man in a power suit in New York City, right? And so when we're talking about things like a Southern accent or, any gender that's not white cis male, right? You are up against this sort of patriarchal norm of what it looks like to be powerful and have presence. And for so long, all the way up to and inclusive of the lean in era, a lot of advice that women were getting felt a little bit like be more like a man. And I'm the queen of like perpetuating that because I love an assertive communication workshop. And I've been talking about assertive communication for women for years, but there's some negotiation around, okay, what is authentic to you? And how do I make sure I'm presenting myself in a way that doesn't sort of shy away from my own presence and power, right? And that's a tricky balance.
It is. And that's where people need that reassurance that executive presence can look like you, whatever that is. And that you can, when you're focused on your strengths, right? What is your experience? By the way, and I do have a great story at some point, but by the way, women in particular, and I think, and not to exclude men, because I work with some men as well who this is an issue. Many times we do not self advocate. We don't talk about our experience. We don't talk about our accomplishments. We don't talk about our strengths. And that is part of that informing other people's opinions about you. And So you really do need to take stock of, what do I bring to the table? Because many times we have imposter syndrome, and especially if we are within a more diverse community. It's right, as you said, Southern accent. When I began teaching at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, I was so self-conscious of my accent. And I thought, are people going to be judging me? Not by the quality of my teaching and all of that. I was there for a reason, but I was very much in my head about it. And once I did lean into that and just brought my authentic self, but performed at a peak performance, high level, right? People saw that as an advantage. I was distinct from other people. So on some level, it became kind of a calling card. I'm that girl from Alabama. But, I mean, and that's the other thing about executive presence, is that what we know, going back to the traditional view, we think of it as that Mad Men put on the suit, look a certain way, but also we focus on first impressions.
Mm. Well, let's dig into that because your book really pushes back on the first impression being all that matters. So your framework really distinguishes between those initial impressions and what you call enduring impressions. Let's dig into that because I really want to know what you posit sustains a powerful impression over time.
hmm First impressions are important, so we don't want to discount that. It does matter when you initially meet someone, and confidence, but by the way, confidence does not always look like an extroverted, masculine kind of charisma, gravitas. Confidence can be self assured, poised, grace under fire. It can be an introverted calmness, right? But those first impressions do matter, appearance, engagement, all of that. But how many times, and your audience is all going to find an example in their brain that pops into their head. How many times have you been impressed with someone, and then over time you were disappointed in that individual, right? Like they made this great, strong first impression, and you thought they were going to be this fabulous leader. They had all of the, reputation and status. They said the right things, all of that. But over time, you found that to be an illusion. This is why enduring impressions really matter most. It's kind of like that tip of the iceberg is the first impression, and the underneath of the iceberg is enduring impressions. It's things like, what are your values in action? You say that you value certain things as a leader, and then do people see you enacting upon those values?
Right. You mentioned trust earlier. You need congruence there, right?
Exactly. Because I'm not going to follow you if I don't trust you. And secondly, interpersonal integrity. Huge. In first impressions, I can act like I want to get to know you. I can have engaging, right, skills. But let's say I meet you, I'm super interested in you, blah, 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 ask you questions. And the next week I meet you, I forgot that I met you. I have no idea what your name is. Don't remember our last conversation. So a leader that has interpersonal integrity, people trust the relationship. So what you say to me is what you're going to say behind my back. You remember our last conversation. You're actually invested in me as a person, not just as someone to get things done through, right? So those qualities that are more long term, that show themselves over time, do you have the knowledge and expertise that at the beginning you said that you had? Do we see that?
The distinction that's coming to mind for me is that old adage around like, do you want a workhorse or a show horse?
Oh,
And
that's good.
and I'm thinking about how so many women I know are workhorses. They get it done. They have the integrity. They build the trust. They follow through on their commitments. They like are the reason why the organization exists and can function. But it is the show horse piece that's often a challenge. And you mentioned earlier, women's ability to self-advocate, which is something we talk a lot about here at Bossed Up. And I think so many women are afraid of the social penalties that come with being seen as braggadocious, right? Or bragging on yourself. And so I wonder if that binary is just a false choice. the workhorse versus show horse and what it would look like to really develop the show horsemanship or womanship if that's the part that's missing.
Well, so like I said, I work with a lot of people on this. And when Carl and I teach the course, this is something that we do. We actually teach people that leadership advocacy pitch, and it's in the book, right? Because, okay, so I'm going to tell you a quick story. I'm going to try to make it as quick as I can. So, my first job, right, that was, I've counted my really career first job. As I said, I was a development director for a nonprofit. It was the school that my children went to. And I was in love with the school, and it was in a really bad place. Okay. Like it was teetering. It was a private school, all the things, but great values, loved it, fabulous education, but just not known of really. I mean, it didn't have a presence. So I began working as a development director. Now, Emily, for the first couple of years, I really did not take much of a paycheck here. Okay. Because I was just invested, but I was wholly invested. And at the end of 3 years, they had promised, right, that at a certain point, this was going to be a full-time position and all these things and blah, blah, blah. I turned the school around. I mean, enrollment was up. They had a wait list. I was, doing fundraising benefits. They were making more money than they had ever made. I mean, all of these things. But I was assuming that people who are making the decisions about that position 3 years down the road saw what I was doing. That assumption ended up biting me. So I had the opportunity to go to those board meetings every month, right? But I didn't take the opportunity to give a 5-minute update. Hey, here are the papers that we've been in. Here's what we've done. This is how much money we've raised. Our tuition is up by 12%, yada, yada, because I assumed people saw the work.
Yeah, the work stands for itself. I've heard that.
Exactly. And that's where people get stuck. So 3 years later came, and guess what happened? They decided they were in such a good position, they didn't need anybody to do that work. And I was about 30 years old, and I want to tell you, I was crushed, crushed. And anyway, that they could have a volunteer and it could be part time. That's kind of what they were going to go to. So it taught me an invaluable lesson. And every position I ever had after that, I made sure that when there was an opportunity at a meeting to give a report with my direct report or my boss one-on-one, that I was talking about the accomplishments and not to brag on myself, but to give them talking points, right? So it's almost like reframe your mindset of being braggy to giving your team, your boss, management, the leaders, an understanding of the work that you're doing so they value it, but then so they can talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like writing the script for like the impact you're having so that they can talk about the impact you're having. And I think that frame I've also found just focusing on the impact, not just the actions that you're taking, can help us overcome that self-centered feeling that feels kind of icky for a lot of women and just say, look, let me tell you about the impact I've had on others this month, this week, this year. And when you can frame it that way, talking about all the great work you're doing and the ways you turn that school around feels less weird if you're less about like, I'm taking credit for all this stuff. And you're more like, they experienced this positive outcome because of what I did. There's some framework there that feels like you're flipping the focus from you to someone else. And that's what servant leaders do, right? That's sort of a leadership move in and of itself. I mean, in your work with women in particular, what are the common challenges that get in the way there? And how do you push back on like the imposter syndrome conversation or the things that just bog women down from being able to confidently exercise that presence?
Okay, I will tell you. In fact, I had this conversation with one of my colleagues at Hopkins recently. I am coaching and I have been coaching, but currently I'm coaching about, 10 people from a specific organization. Once again, all mid-level, trying to get to that upper level position. And there are 3 things that are holding people back. And it's so interesting to me that everybody has these same challenges. So one is that they've been offered a seat at the table. So let's say they are now included in some larger meetings and they're self-censoring. They're not sharing their ideas. Well, I'm not the expert in the room. Okay, you were invited in that room for a reason. They wanted to hear your perspective. The other things that they're telling me is, well, I don't want to just add noise to add noise. Everybody else is talking. Okay, great. Don't. When you speak, have something, quality, right, to say, but also asking a clarifying question can be showing up, right? Can I ask how this, will impact the organizational vision for the next 6 months? I mean, so one, it's showing up, it's stop self-censoring yourself.
Like, take advantage of it, right?
Right.
Shoot your shot. Shoot your shot. Yeah.
But think, hey, if I've got something from my perspective and the work that I do, it could be beneficial to the group. And because what they find is that they don't say something, and 5 minutes later, somebody says what they were thinking, but they're not showing up, right? So that's one. The second thing is that self-advocacy pitch, right? Or that self-advocacy piece is they're having opportunities in meetings to report out, maybe on projects or something. But you said it just a minute ago, they're focused on reporting tasks and not impact. And many times they're also focused on reporting what is currently happening instead of every once in a while telling the story about, remember the thing that we finished 3 months ago? Well, let me go ahead and bring you up to speed on the impact that's had. So drawing a bigger picture and being seen as somebody who sees larger than ground level, more kind of 60,000 foot level. So that is another kind of challenge. And the third thing is the imposter syndrome just from day to day, how we show up. And it is about taking time. This is interesting. Somebody who is seen as confident is also in control of time. So when you walk in a room, you don't have to speak immediately, right? When you are asked a question, count to 3 silently in your head. Because you come across as being more thoughtful. So it's almost a pacing. They're wanting to be seen as someone who has all the answers, and they're rushing, and that rushing is actually working against them.
Yeah, I have worked in environments where people are all perpetually 5 minutes behind, which drives me crazy. Like, no meetings start on time, and that's just the norm. And I understand where that comes from. Like, there's a chronic overscheduling, there's a aspirational planning that just is an undercurrent at this organization. But if you actually arrive to that meeting 2 minutes before you need to be there because you ended your last meeting 5 minutes before the top of the hour, right? And you're advocating for your own time management from the get-go. Then when you arrive, you're going to have your ability to switch channels in your brain and have the presence, the focus, the clarity that you want to bring to that meeting. So you're so right in connecting time management to executive presence, because the harried, like, people pleaser who's just trying to have the answers all the time for everyone, it does not read well. It just does not read as confident, right?
Yeah, and to your point, this is so funny. Last week, I was working with a group of veterans. So these are men, it was all men, who have had a career in the military, and now they're transitioning into corporate America. So really interesting kind of, and they have big imposter syndrome. These are super confident guys, right? But one of them, we talked about this timepiece, and one of them shared that earlier in his career, he was running down a hall and his commander stopped him and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm hurrying, da da da." And he said, "Son, leaders don't run." And I thought that was such a perfect picture of, you've seen those people who are looking busy, acting busy, like they're acting overwhelmed. That works against the perception of them as being self assured, having that grace or poise, under pressure. And so we want to think about how we manage that time, whether it is time management, arriving in the room early, or just pausing before speaking.
I can hear the sigh that is probably coming out of the mouths of women listening to this who are exhausted and overwhelmed and overcommitted, who are like, really? Like, me trying to be everything to everyone is just having the opposite of the intended effect. And I just want to kind of hold people's hands through that for a moment, because it doesn't feel good. It feels a little victim blamey to say, if you're performing overwhelm, then you're coming across as not poised. But it's true. Like, there's some truth to it, which is, if you are operating in an environment, in an organization where you have to overcommit, where you are holding up the sky for the organization and you're totally overcommitted, that's not a personal failure. That's an organizational liability, right? And if you're not drawing the healthy boundaries you need to protect your time, to protect the pace with which you can work, so that you are not sprinting through the hallways to achieve the impossible every day, like, you are not setting yourself up for the kind of executive presence that actually lands you raises and promotions, right? And so you're like, you are doing the most and you are over functioning for an organization that is viewing you as less valuable while you do that. And that is a real tough irony, but it's a pill that I think we have to swallow.
Yeah, and you bring up something that you made me think of this. I have worked with a couple of women who are in management, leadership positions, right? Who are afraid to delegate.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh.
And here's the crazy thing. They are absolutely overcommitted. They're so afraid that their team is as overcommitted as they are. And so they're afraid to pass things along. And here's the funny thing. Once I encourage them that, hey, you know what? There might be opportunities that are coming to you from above, that are coming to you, that it might be an opportunity to empower someone, right, that is a direct report or a teammate, to have an experience that they wouldn't necessarily or otherwise have. And so flipping that mindset as well, like, maybe I could give someone else, not think of it as a burden, but an opportunity. And so we have these conversations. Women come back to the next session and they're like, oh, I I didn't realize that they were not as busy as me. I was projecting that my team had as much going on as I did. And once I asked, hey, here's a thing that's come on my plate. Is there someone that would welcome this opportunity, that would be willing to take this on? You're not forcing that, right? But you're offering. And I'm thinking of this one woman in particular. She was amazed that people were willing and eager to do some things. So, how much are we actually putting on ourselves?
Totally. It's so funny because you bring up so many topics that we've done some deep dives into. I'm going to put some links to related episodes in the show notes, because on delegation and imposter syndrome, it's also interconnected. It's like, to manage yourself is a prerequisite to manage others' perceptions of yourself, right? So if you're managing what's on my plate, what am I delegating? What is my team doing? How are we measuring success? What's my, like, you've got those leadership and management toolkit 101, then you can really focus on perception management, which is going to actually get you pretty far. And that's what actually helps unearth opportunities when other people see you as capable of more. And so I want to sort of start to close here, referencing your framework that you use in every chapter of the book around inform, equip, and empower. So if someone listening to this episode is coming towards the end and they're going, okay, I get it. I want to work on informing, equipping, and empowering to be able to be seen as having more presence. If they want to start working on their executive presence today, like, what's the most impactful way for them to get started?
Okay, I love this. This is the simplest activity. Anybody can do it. The first thing is grab a pen and a piece of paper, okay? And I want you to think about, if I or you, right, were to poll the people that they work with horizontally, right? Direct reports, management, leaders above, whatever. And if someone were to ask, hey, give me 3 adjectives to describe Alexa. right? So I want everybody to think about what are 3 adjectives that people would currently use to describe them. Be really honest when they're not in the room, right? Because that's when people are saying the honest things. So write
Yes.
down those 3 adjectives and they can be positive. But now I want you to take a moment and think at my best, right? Making those impressions that I truly want to make so that I get that next position, have that advancement, whatever. What are the adjectives that I need to be conveying? Now, mind you, they need to be authentic, right? They need to align so that you can maintain them. But look at that first list and then write that second list of 3 adjectives and see where you can grow. And the second thing is to say, okay, here are those 3 adjectives that I want. Now, how do I begin to create those impressions? Through my attitudes, through my actions, through the words that I use, through how I communicate, behaviors. What can I do to begin to create those impressions? And if you create those impressions consistently over time, you will shift people's perceptions of you. So that is a step 1.
It's a great step because it's gonna also differ for every one of us, right? Like, the gap we're looking to close is going to be very unique to who we are, and how you go about making that happen is a multifaceted approach, right? There's so much more we didn't get to today, but I do know that, a lot of what we started talking about even before we hit record here is the virtual presence that we're creating, which I do want to touch upon because you logged on with a crisp white collar shirt and a red lip. And I went, wow, you look so like put together. And I said, of course you look so put together. This is what you do. And so I'm curious, in the virtual environment, in this Zoom heavy culture that so many of us find ourselves in, or just even in the fact that our presence is not just at work, it's also on LinkedIn, kind of doing a job for us in the background. What's like a tip or two you've got for us thinking about closing that gap in between those adjectives using technology and understanding our tech heavy environments that we operate in?
Okay, thinking about those 3 adjectives, right, that you want people to use when you're not in the room. All right, what do they look like? Because you're talking about virtual, which is visual, and LinkedIn, something which is visual, and people are visual. 68 to 93% of a message's meaning is visual. It's nonverbal. So it's not the words, it's not what we're saying, it's how we sound, what we look like, our background, all of that. So you really are setting the stage. And I want you to think about, for your audience, to think about, okay, virtually, let's start there. What is my stage? What's in my background? Do I have on something that has structure? If I want to be seen as a leader, this is my number 1 tip for women in terms of clothing, because there is not a prescriptive style. I'm not going to tell people to wear a power suit or anything else. But if you're trying to convey messages of leadership and strength, structure. So having a collar or a blazer, even over a t-shirt, just lines, right? But good background, great lighting, your camera looking straight at your face instead of up your nose. All those things matter. But then also when you're on LinkedIn, look, do you have a great headshot? Don't do the AI thing. Please don't do that. Unless it's just airbrushing a little bit.
We're not face tuning for LinkedIn, please, for the love of God.
Please. I
Yes.
mean, I have seen people, honestly, that have put some AI picture on there and it makes them look 30 years younger. And I'm like, you're actually dashing your credibility because now I'm going to hop on Zoom with you and I'm going to think that I'm with your aunt. Like, what's
Yes,
going on?
exactly.
Like, don't do it. But good looking picture, right? Think about that background image on LinkedIn. Is it visually conveying what you want professionally to be conveyed? And then also those 3 adjectives that you just chose, you write that about in your LinkedIn. Are you using those words to describe yourself? If I want to be seen as strategic and innovative and, you know, collaborative, I mean, then am I writing about myself that's highlighting my experience, but using those terms so that people immediately start associating that with me?
Yes, I love that. Congruence, again, of message, right? Online and offline. I love that so much. Speaking of visual, there's so many great visuals in the book that you've written, which I love seeing, for folks who really want something that they can embody as you describe it. It's really well described in the presence principle. Where can our listeners who are chomping at the bit for more from you, Dr. Alexa, where can they keep up with you and get their hands on a copy of your book?
Well, absolutely connect to me on LinkedIn. I am very responsive. So even if people want to message me, you don't have to follow me. You can connect me. But if you want to message and ask, I will actually send people like a 1-page PDF of kind of tips around executive presence. Just happily send them that. But they can connect to me there. The book is on Amazon, and I'm going to send you the link to Routledge, which is the publisher, and there is a 25% discount going directly through them. So it is cheaper going directly through that site. So I'll make sure that that's there so that you can link that under the podcast.
Yeah, we'll put that in today's show notes and blog post. Thank you so much for joining us. This was wonderful.
I've enjoyed it. It's been fun.
For links to everything Dr. Alexa and I just talked about, head to bossedup.org/episode 547. That's bossedup.org/episode 547. There you'll find a fully written out transcript of today's conversation alongside a summarizing blog post that synthesizes Dr. Alexa's key points. As always, I'd love to keep the conversation going after the episode in the Bossed Up Courage community on Facebook and in the Bossed Up group on LinkedIn. What do you make of this concept of executive presence? Do you feel like you have it? Do you feel like you're lacking it? Have you been told that you're lacking it? And if so, how are you experimenting with developing your presence so that you can develop the perception you need to succeed, whatever that looks like for you? I'd love to keep the conversation going and hear from you on this. As always, in the meantime, let's keep Boston in pursuit of our purpose, and together, let's lift as we climb.